When Jesus realized they were about to come and take him away by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Now, I grew up in a United Methodist church, nearby, in fact, in Plattsmouth, and I don't remember a single, coloring page in Sunday school about the day that people came to take Jesus by force and he escaped to a mountain. Maybe you do. But even after a year of New Testament and seminary and other classes and study further down the road, this moment I was like, what is happening here? See, it's from the Gospel of John, chapter 6, and it's like this tiny little sandwich in between epic bread, bigger than Texas toast, huge. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. The first service didn't get that attempt at a joke. You're welcome. The beginning of the gospel, or the beginning of this chapter, is about Jesus on the hillside. It's a favorite text of me and of you maybe, where Jesus is with the whole community gathered, and they're there, and he's been teaching, and it's time for the folks to go home and eat, and Jesus looks at the disciples and is like, we're going to set out a buffet, and the disciples are like, we didn't have a catering contract, we didn't arrange this, you didn't tell us in advance, this is unfair, Jesus, we didn't sign up for it, and Jesus is like, eh. And then the accountant disciple is like, well, it would take us 6 months' wages, and that buffet would be kind of sparse. And then a child with their ancient Mediterranean bento box that was packed by their mom shows up with 2 fish and a few loaves of bread, and Jesus takes it and breaks it open, and the whole community eats in abundance. The miracle is everyone shares. This vulnerable child shares, and so everyone else does. And it is after this moment where you have this little tiny verse, Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force and make him king. And the other kind of end of this gospel, this chapter, is the moment on the boat. The storm is raging, this moment of stilling, this moment of sensing Jesus moving on the water in a way that is so unfathomable, right? It's no wonder this little verse gets kind of missed. But Jesus withdrew. And he does that all the time. If we're honest, if we look through all of the Gospels, he makes space to pause and to pray. They make space to go to the synagogue and worship. They make space for their spiritual life over and over and over. The beginning of the Gospels talk about Jesus being baptized and going into the wilderness and discerning, clarifying his mission and who he is and how he will be in the world. And so in this moment where the crowd says, we like this guy, we want him to be in charge, he doesn't listen, he doesn't negotiate, he's not seduced by the idea of power in a way that he didn't conceive of. He doesn't even say, let's organize this a little bit better, you all are with me, we have more human capital here, we can do something. He leaves. He's like, this is not who I am. This is not for me. He knows at the center of how he wants to be, who he wants to be in the world, and when it's not that, he pauses and finds his center again. I think that part of Jesus's work in this invites us to our own work of centering, of knowing who we are, and figuring that out if we're not quite sure. And I don't know how you feel about that, but I know that that is sometimes a challenge. I don't feel like we grow up in a culture that's like, let's figure out your gifts, your particular being. And that sometimes I feel like we run into those moments where we're not in our center, where we're not in this space of who we are, and our gut says, oh, well, something is up. And maybe you're not a gut person like me, and maybe you get a headache or tension or your back starts aching and you're like, something is not quite right. And this work of centering, like it's actual work. And it's not just for when you need it, it is for all the time. It is a spiritual practice. And just like we send kids to practice ballet or soccer or track or cross country or whatever they want to practice, like you need the scales to be able to play your instrument. Spiritual practices are about intentional living. I want to invite us into Saint Benedict. And he's not sort of our contemporary by any stretch of the imagination. He's sort of a 6th century abbot. And he develops this lay community. And there's kind of a lot of mystery about him because Pope Gregory really writes about him in these sort of delightful, enthusiastic ways. And there are some scholars who would say that maybe some of the things that are attributed to Benedict mirror some of the other rules of life that were created in other monastic communities, like maybe a Celtic rule of life. But I don't think anyone in his context was like, hey, plagiarism, I see you. They are trying to live well. And so this rule of life that emerges and flourishes and guides the spiritual life that emerges in European Christianity, it has these values, this supreme value of hospitality, that we should greet one another as we would greet Christ. See, early monastics earlier may have separated. They left. They went to the desert. They're like, people are they are hard, so I'm out. But then there starts to emerge this theme of, yeah, people are hard. Being with people is a spiritual practice. And seeing Christ in folks, even if it is challenging, is meaningful. And if that seems too big to you, you can imagine greeting someone as though they are your hero. Like imagine like Dolly Parton or Lizzo, whoever you'd like, you can imagine. It doesn't have to be a musician. It could be like Dolores Huerta, who you wish would adopt you as a grandma. Maybe not everyone feels that way, but I do. Imagine how you would greet someone who is so sacred and important and valuable, and you apply that in life to everyone. They also have a value of stewardship. And it may be different from the ways that we as modern folks in Urban Abbey talk about stewardship, where we give our shared resources. These abbeys, everyone worked and lived there. And so everyone was engaged in the ways that made life possible. And one of the avenues of stewardship was thinking about the tools for farming were equally sacred as the tools at the table, as the chalice. That was one of the radical things about Benedict's community, is that everyone labored. Everyone did manual labor. And he is a Roman. And that kind of work was reserved for folks who were enslaved or folks who were servants. But Benedict says everybody will labor. It doesn't matter if you have the most education or the least in the abbey. And he seeks balance, this balance of life, this balance of labor and rest, this balance of private prayer and communal prayer, these spaces of intention. There are intentional times throughout the day, this rhythm. And rhythm may be something that we feel a little bit more comfortable using as modern people when we say rule of life. Because rule can feel a little heavy-handed. Rule can remind us of how sometimes rules are made to make folks conform or keep some folks quiet or silenced. How sometimes rules are unjust. But we live in our own bodies and our own beings and our own planet with cycles and seasons. And so I invite us to think about this as a pattern, as a rhythm of how we live and how we live well. This notion of a rule of life was something that folks have carried on. Benedict asked for 3 vows. One of stability, where you made a commitment to really be present, a lifelong rootedness, fidelity, to be shaped and molded, to be there when it was time to pray, whether you felt like it or not. And the last one was obedience, which I say kind of laughing, but it was obedience to the abbot, so take a note. And then he wrote an entire chapter on how abbots should behave. And I haven't read that, so we'll keep looking. These rules of life for community, they're something that aren't just ancient and past, they're something present. Dr. King had a rule of life for folks in movements with him. The rule of life for his demonstrators included meditate daily on the teachings of Jesus, remember that the nonviolent movement in Birmingham seeks justice and reconciliation, not victory. That's a hard rule, I think. Walk and talk in a manner of love for love's sake, for God is love. Pray daily to be used by God in order that all might be free. Observe with both friend and foe the ordinary rules of courtesy. Seek to perform regular service for the world. Refrain from violence of fist, tongue, or heart. Strive to be in good spirit and bodily health. Follow the directions of the movement and the captains of the demonstration. There was discipline, there was intention, and this powered a movement for change. There are folks who take these corporate rules or communal rules, and we could imagine someday having some guidance, some rhythm of life that folks choose as they're ready. But there are also people who create individual rules, ways of incorporating discipline. Like Dorothy Day, the founder of social work, she took the Eucharist daily, she read the Bible, and she kept a journal. It's not this sort of elaborate rule. I bring this to you as someone who has struggled with spiritual practices and disciplines. Just first as a confession, there's a book on centering prayer over here, and I've tried centering prayer, and I can't even stay awake for the book. Like, it just every time. I wrote a rule of life in seminary as a part of one of my classes, and you can see it here. It is super elaborate and very pretty. It is written as a tree, and it is totally aspirational. Like, I was very hopeful about what my time would look like and what my day would look like hours of study and reading, and hours of serving and connecting, and hours of exercising and walking and praying and centering prayer even though I knew that wasn't really going to work out for me. A rule of life is something that, if you were considering creating, might be something to think about what is reasonable, what is realistic. Parents of toddlers or small children, or folks who are caregivers for aging parents or people they love, may not have time to pray for 2 hours a day and then read the Bible for another hour and then take a walk. It would be wise to pick what can really fit for well-being. Wise to choose what really opens you. Maybe instead of centering prayer, it might be sitting down with watercolor paints and pausing. It might be journaling. It might be writing a word of gratitude at the end of the day that roots you. It might be a short meditative phrase or a moment of yoga. The author of Soul Feast, Marjorie Thompson, says that if you are thinking about a rule of life, you might consider these questions. What am I deeply attracted to, and why? What am I deeply attracted to, and why? Where do I feel God is calling me to stretch and grow? What kind of balance do I need in my life? The other part of this is accountability. Maybe with a small group as we begin this season of small groups, maybe with someone that you can trust to ask hard questions in love. to check in with you when you need it. This is a tool for centering, a tool for practicing how we live together and how we live individually that flows into community. See, Jesus' work of centering is not about just him feeling really good about himself. Right? His work of centering is all about how he engages the world with the gifts that he holds. May we have the courage. Amen.